What's up, guys? Today I'm going to be doing a long-term review of the Simagic DS-8X shifter. I've had the shifter for 2 years now, so plenty of time to put it through its paces and see how it is to live with on the rig as my main shifter. So we'll go over my likes, my dislikes, and any problems I've had over the course of ownership. So let's get right to it. Design-wise, I really like this shifter. It's pretty compact. It's built very robustly. It feels like an absolute brick when you take it out of the box. It's a nice, clean, black design with the Simagic logos in white instead of the usual white and red that they do on their wheels. So if this is going to be your only Simagic product and you want to integrate it with your rig, it's not going to clash with any other colors you have going on or anything like that. On the front of the rig, you have a USB-B port to connect to your PC. On the side is the switch to go from sequential to H pattern, and on the rear is an adjustment screw for the tension in both H pattern and sequential modes. And then around the base of the shifter, on the front and back, you have 2 slots and a mounting hole. So real easy to mount from the top onto a shifter plate or directly to profile with a T-nut like I have. And then there are 4 threaded holes on the bottom if you want to mount to a shifter plate as well. This shifter is a 8 forward gear and 1 reverse shifter. So you have first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. Then you pull up on this collar to go to 7th. You can let go of the collar at that point. It'll stay in this far right gate. 8th. And then you just put it back to center and the reverse lockout goes back down. And then reverse is over and to the left. So simple mechanism. I do prefer this over having to push down on the shifter. I find this movement a lot more natural. Now my car in real life has the same thing, so that's probably why I prefer it. But honestly, I think for most people, this is going to be a little bit of an easier motion. My only complaint with this action is going from 7th to 6th can be tricky. I mean, there I just went into 4th. So you have to really think about the 7th to 6th shift. But honestly, you're talking like C7 Corvette and a newer 911 are about the only cars that really have, 7-speed manual transmission. So it's not something you're really going to have to deal with often. My favorite part of the shifter is definitely the feel when you're in H pattern mode. The gates are nice and defined. Going into gear, there's a nice detent. Same with coming out of gear. You're never mistaking if you're in gear or not. And when you have it on the max tension setting that I have, there's a good amount of resistance going into the gate. So even with quick shifts, you still feel that detent. Really nice to use. Again, as I stated earlier, I just wish the middle gate was a little more tight as far as effort needed, but very small nitpick there. Now, as far as the sequential mode goes on the shifter, considering this is a combo shifter, H pattern and sequential, I think the feel is really good. There's a good amount of resistance, and then there's a slight fall off at the very end of the travel. And that's when you're, either shifting up or shifting down. And so you're never in doubt when you're changing gears. If you've watched my review of the Q1S, the Simagic dedicated sequential shifter, you'll know that I had some issues with the consistency of it in regards to when the micro switch was sending the shifting signal versus when the actual mechanism inside was engaging. And that got really frustrating over time. This, I don't have any doubt, any inconsistencies whenever I'm shifting. Now, you're not getting any kind of real tactile feel from this sequential compared to that. There's no mechanism inside here that's really engaging anything. So you're purely relying on the hard stop at the end. But honestly, the travel, I think they nailed the distance, and it just feels good to use. And then if you have family members in the house or roommates, anything like that, this is much quieter than a dedicated shifter or dedicated sequential shifter. I mean, you can hear barely any noise. So that's a plus for some people. Now, I personally don't really like this shift knob for sequential mode. This is more comfortable doing an overhand position. I find for sequential, I prefer like a side grip position. So it does the job, but honestly, I think most people be happy with something else. So you can swap shift knobs, obviously. And I have a couple from Simagic. So first we'll do this one. This is the long handle. You can buy this pretty much anywhere that sells Simagic gear. And this will obviously increase the height of the shift knob, but it's a cylinder shape, so much easier to do the side grip. Now, the main downside with this one is because it's taller, it means you have more leverage, and so the force required to do the shift is less. So you do lose a little bit of the feel. Part of that may also be, where you're grabbing is above where the threads are inside the shifter, so some of the vibration from hitting the stop isn't transferring all the way to your hand. But, it works, easy to find, not very expensive. I think these shift knobs are like 15, 20 bucks, something like that. But I also have from my Q1S, the Q1S shift handle. Now this is essentially the same shape, but much shorter. And this one I find to be perfect. Because it's so much shorter, you don't have any more leverage than you do with this shift knob. It's essentially the same height. And because you're grabbing mainly where the threads are, most of the vibration is transferring to your hand. So once I started using this, that was the moment I realized that I probably wasn't going to want to switch out to my Q1S all the time. It feels perfect to me, honestly. The problem with this is Simagic doesn't seem to sell this on its own. You can buy the Q1S included with this shifter, or this shift knob, the longer one, but you can't buy just the short one on its own. At least I haven't seen it. Maybe it's a case of, your distributor can source one for you and send it to you. Just this transforms the sequential feel for me, honestly. And, just the advantage of being able to instantly switch to it from H pattern, not having to remove the shifter, not having to awkwardly mount another sequential shifter, just makes me just super happy with this shifter, honestly. I really don't know why they don't sell this on its own. Now, obviously, you could get your own aftermarket shift knob to put on here. The one thing you want to make sure, though, is that you're going to have space for the reverse lockout to rise up. Because if you get one where the threads are so recessed into the shift knob, you may end up hitting the reverse lockout, and then you wouldn't be able to go into reverse. Now, sequential mode, obviously that doesn't matter because you're not using it, but H pattern mode, definitely something to think about. There's a shift knob I have in my actual car that, there's this much at the bottom of the shifter that isn't even threaded, so it wouldn't work on here without an extender. And so, speaking of extenders, really cheap on Amazon. This, I think, costs like $8, $7. So if you do want to use a specific shift knob, or if you just want to raise the height of your shift knob in general, this is another option that is very easy to do. So yeah, much higher. I can get it right up next to where my hand is on the wheel. But again, you have more leverage, so you lose a little too much feel for me, honestly, and then your travel is a little longer because you're so much higher. You've increased the length of the lever arm essentially. But it's always an option. Just showing that for everybody in case anyone was interested. And now with the Simpro Manager software from Simagic, there's a few things you can do with this shifter. One, you can calibrate it, make sure your gears are where they need to be. And you can test to make sure they're all working. But if we switch to sequential mode, you have a few different options. Now, these two here, if you connect the shifter directly to a Simagic wheelbase or to the CAN bus hub that Simagic has and then have that running to your wheelbase, you unlock these two options. So the first one, sync with paddles. This makes it where the paddle input and the shifter input are the same button number. So if you're playing a game where you can only map, one shift up and one shift down button, this is useful for that. So if you're switching between paddle shift cars, sequential cars, you don't have to remap anything. And then the flip side is if you don't sync it, then, if it's a game where you only do paddle shifts, you can map the sequential up and down to do different functions in the game if you wanted. So that's nice to have that choice. And then you also can invert shift direction. So if I turn that off, pulling down shifts down, pushing forward shifts up. If I hit that, then it becomes the opposite. Obviously, you could map this differently in game, but it's nice to just have it at the software side so you're not having to remap everything in game. So yeah, if you're just using USB, I'm assuming it's just going to be the button 61 and button 62, so you'd map it just like you would any other controller. All right, now we come to the fun part of the review where I talk about any issues I've had with this shifter over the 2 years I've had it. And I've really only had one big one, and that is the sequential spring snapping. There's just a single spring inside for sequential mode, a hook on each end. That's what gives you the tension and returns back to center. One of the hooks broke, and so the one silver lining of that, of what happens if it breaks, is the actual signal of shift up, shift down still works. So it operates basically just like you're going from third to fourth, so you would have to just return it to center manually, but it'll still send the shifting signal to the game. So, that's kind of a plus, where if it does break, it still technically will work with the game. So if you're mid-race, it's not going to end your race or anything. But this happened only like 4 months into ownership, I think. Reached out to SimMotion US, who I bought it from. Shout out to them. They responded very quickly, sent me out a replacement spring immediately for free, and also sent me a video showing how to disassemble the shifter. Now, the video was produced by Simagic, not SimMotion, and unfortunately the video is like 480p resolution, filmed from too far away in my opinion, and so some of the finer details were hard to make out in the video, but taking the shifter apart was pretty easy. If you've dealt with anything remotely, mechanical, taking anything apart, put it back together, it's very simple. The shifter is pretty easy until you get to the very end trying to get the spring in, but that's more just manipulating the spring versus seeing how it all goes together. But if you're very new to that kind of thing, the repair might be a little tricky for you. But the spring I was sent, the replacement spring I was sent, was a different spring than the one that came with it. So I'm guessing at some point they've realized that it's, an issue with the spring, and they've replaced the spring, and hopefully the ones made after they realize that issue have used the included spring. And I mean, I see less and less complaints in the Discord, the Simagic Discord, about the spring snapping. So I'm assuming if you buy a new one now, you won't have that issue. And the replacement spring has been completely fine since I installed it. So I've had it over a year, and it still works. Still works perfectly fine. So I would assume this problem has been fixed, but if you're buying a used one, or if you're buying one, maybe it's an old one that's been sitting around that, the retailer just hasn't sold yet, just know there's a slight possibility that may happen, but I would assume after a certain manufacturing date, they fix that. So overall, I would highly recommend this shifter, especially if you're in the Simagic ecosystem. Being able to plug it up directly to your wheelbase and saving a USB port on your PC is always nice. But even if you're not, this is a nice compact design, color neutral, will go on any rig. And, usually these combo shifters have either, a very poor manual mode or a very poor sequential mode. And I think this one is the best compromise that I've personally felt, where the H pattern mode is really good. The sequential mode is solid. It's not as tactile as a dedicated sequential, but for an all-in-one, I think this knocks it out of the park. So besides, the slight concern that you may get an older model with a spring that's going to let go at some point, I really don't see any major downsides to this. So, like I said, would highly recommend it if you're looking for a combo shifter. But other than that, think that is all I have to say on this one. So appreciate you guys tuning in, and hopefully I will catch you on the next one soon. Peace.